So this is the Mission Maker Workshop. If you don't know who I am, which everyone here should, I have over 5,000 hours in Arma 3. I consider myself an SQS expert, and I do most of the heavy lifting for Opsta. So that's my qualifications to give this PowerPoint. I assume everyone here watched the homework video, mainly because I'm not going to really go over that too much. I don't want to beat a dead horse. That's most of the real simple stuff on how to actually put it together and get it working. This is going to be more of the design process, tips and tricks I've picked up along the way. We'll cover a couple specific modules, such, and kind of hit stuff like that. So before we actually get in, I'm just going to go over, so I touched on it briefly in that video, but before you launch Arma, you really want to make sure you have any cosmetic mods disabled. So that's going to be stuff like JSRS, Blast Core, visual setting enhancements. Basically, if it doesn't do anything to help you in the editor, turn it off. Because a lot of those create dependencies even though they really shouldn't, and what that means is that when you save the mission, everybody has to be running those mods. So if somebody doesn't want to run Blast Core and you use Blast Core to make it, they're going to have to run Blast Core or they're not going to be able to join the mission. And then I can show you how to look at that. I'll show you in a second. But just quickly, I'm going to touch on editor enhancement mods. So like things like 3D enhanced. There's some interior stuff. There's some custom composition stuff. Generally, it's going to say in the workshop or the Armaholic page or whatever if it creates dependencies or not. It'll say, hey, no dependencies, or someone's going to ask in the comments if it creates dependencies, stuff like that. If it doesn't create dependencies, you're good to go. Some do. If they do, you can't use them. Sorry, same kind of deal as cosmetic mods. So just to kind of show you, if you're in a scenario you've made, right? If you go to scenario at the top left and go down to show required add-ons, these are mission dependencies. So you'll see as you put stuff, this will populate. So as I go through, because I have JSO units down, the JSO units is dependent. Ace3 dragging, because most of the Ace3 stuff is going to be there by default. I have some grad trenches down, so these are required. Right, and then advanced is just the raw patch name or whatever. So if you see like JSRS or Blast Core in here, that's bad, right? Now, there is a way to remove dependencies, because once you put them in here, you can't really take them out easily. There is a way to do it, but it's a huge pain in the dick, and it takes forever. So the best way to avoid that is to just not do it in the first place. But just be aware of that. It's not a huge deal. Just be aware of it. And if you do run into an issue where there's some weird dependency problems, you can hit up me or Macus. I think Macus knows how to do it as well, to kind of remove those dependencies. But just be aware it takes a while. It's kind of painful. Units and equipment. So we have the JSO asset register, we have the mission making document, we have our equipment register. So that's all there for a reason, right? So as an organization, we like to use the same equipment if possible always, because it creates familiarity, and then it lets us focus less on how to utilize that equipment and more on the tactics and procedures that we want to work on, right? Because that's kind of the core focus of our gameplays, is coming up with and refining interesting tactics and procedures. So that's like the mission statement, right? But beware, it's not set in stone, right? So if you want to give JSO some weird vehicle or whatever, if you can come up with a reason to do it, if you can come up with an interesting and compelling reason to give us like something weird, go for it. Why not, right? It's always an interesting break, right? With that said, don't do that every mission, right? It should not be the norm, right? To be using weird shit every mission. But it's cool if we use it, like every now and then, to get a weird vehicle or to have some weird equipment restrictions or whatever, right? So like I like to say, not set in stone, but it's not a vague idea. So just to give an example, right? For an idea I used this for, there was a mission about a year ago where some JSO pilots went down, or JSO advisors went down in a plane crash, right? And so the JSO ground forces and an air asset had to move to find them and pick them up and rescue them. The problem was there was like a revolution kind of going on where the local police force were like half good, half bad, right? It was kind of like on a faction basis. So JSO, because they had to mobilize quickly, couldn't bring their like panders and stuff, right? So they only had like local police trucks to work with, right? That's the lore reason. The gameplay reason was now the air asset had to try to identify, is that JSO driving that police truck or is that enemy police truck driving around? Like they had to use that communication to figure that out, and created this interesting gameplay loop where they had to constantly be in communication, like looking for JSO friendly forces and these JSO downed advisors, like at the same time they had to keep eyes in two directions, right? And it created that interesting gameplay loop. And that was kind of the compelling reason for that, right? But I wouldn't do that every mission. I wouldn't give every mission like a truck or whatever. Not set in stone, but not a vague idea. And the same kind of thing goes with the JSO loadout. So the last little thing I want to hit on units and equipment stuff, right? So every mission we have to, put together broadsword, right? You want to have the same kind of setup every time it's described in the mission maker checklist and all that. But it's a huge pain in the dick to do it every time. So there's an editor feature that not many people are aware of. So let's say I put down, I don't know, these 3 dudes, right? And they're all in the same unit. And let's pretend I set them all up to be playable JSO dudes. Right? Instead of doing that every single mission, you can create a custom composition. And so you can just plop them down whenever. So I have my little 3-man group here, right? I highlight all of them. I go up to Objects, or Compositions, which you can hit F2 as a shortcut. And then go over to Custom on the far right. And now, at the bottom, I can hit this Save Custom. Or you can right-click the selected units and hit, it's here somewhere. Save Custom Composition, right? And now I can name it whatever, right? And they'll pop up over here, right? So now, instead of having to build this team every time, I can just plop them down, right? And so I normally have one for all of the different broadsword types, but I haven't gotten around to making the snow and arid ones yet. But I can just plop this down. I don't have to spend all that time making the whole platoon. I have them all set to playable. The names are all right. They're all grouped together. The group's names are all set and all that good stuff. Right. And so anything to kind of take the menial, boring tasks out of mission making, right? Nobody likes doing that, right? So just small things you can do here and there. And then I think I can export these at some point. I'm going to get around to looking that up and give it to people. But for now, you can just do it once, right? In accordance with the documents and all that, and then be done with it. Never have to do it again. So that's the boring technical stuff out of the way. This is the more fun stuff, right? Mission design. This is kind of what the actual meat of making missions, and this is the part I find enjoyable, is like the actual designing of it. And I think a lot of the real barrier is how do you think of how do you start, right? I like to use the term keystone of inspiration because I normally fly around in the editor. I pick a terrain that I find interesting, and I try to find a piece of interesting terrain, or maybe I'll think of a unique scenario or objective, something novel that we haven't done before, or that has like a neat twist on it, right? Or maybe like a weird restriction, like you can't use radios, or I don't know, everybody's split up, you were airborne and scattered, what have you, right? Something interesting, something unique, a keystone, right? Something that's going to hold the whole kind of mission together. And then from there, you kind of keep stacking those up, right? So you have the main piece, right? So for this mission in particular, I knew that I wanted to have JSO assault, like a fob out in the... what's invisible? I wanted to have them assault a fob that was out in like the forest, right? And I knew I kind of wanted them to have to... you guys to like trek through the forest and because we never really assaulted into a fob like this before. Like we've had like these fire-based kind of missions before where you have to defend it, but we've never had one where you have to assault. And that kind of created interesting challenges, and I thought, this is going to be one, fun to create, and two, I think it'll make a fun mission, right? Kind of a chaotic mission. Where not only do you have to then, you assault it, so you kind of learn what it feels like to be an attacker, but then you kind of have to defend it for a little bit to figure out where the enemy's coming from. And you kind of already have that primal knowledge, right? Because you went through there. So part of this also comes around to you have to think of it as a player, not only because this looks cool, right? It's a cool looking fob, right? But it's designed in such a way that it's fun to attack. I had to because it doesn't make sense. There's like a third weird little entrance over here, or that you can like climb over this. That makes no sense. Or like there's no mines or anything. It doesn't make sense, like realistically. But it has to be fun. Like that's the first and foremost thing. It has to be fun. And so, like that, and then I like the forest fighting kind of stuff, and I thought it would be interesting if there was like an enemy air recon going around. Like I'm kind of stacking these keystones, right? Like, hey, this is interesting, this is interesting, without getting too complex, right? Too in the weeds. I had to come up with so I came up with the objective, right? So this is an interesting objective to go with. But then you kind of have to think of a reason to do it, right? Why the hell would JSO be attacking this random fob out in the middle of Tanoa, right? There's no reason to be out here. So that comes up to the next thing, creating a plausible scenario, right? So for the most part, weekend operations, they have to be grounded in reality, right? They have to be anchored. They can't just be random nonsense, right? Midweek missions, you have a little more leeway. You can kind of just make stuff up as you go because, it's a little lax, right? But Weekend operations are kind of more official, so they kind of have to be grounded in reality. I like to say a degree in international politics helps. So if you know kind of what's going on in the real world, you kind of understand how everything works together, and that means that you can draw from that knowledge to kind of come up with weird scenarios, right? So like the other week we had Eastern Blockistan, right? Because it doesn't make sense for Russia to be doing it, and it also doesn't make sense if you know kind of how it all set up, right? So you just having this background knowledge, and sometimes you have to come up with stuff, right? So like Eastern Blockistan, just make up a country, because it's not uncommon for those kind of countries to like, just kind of take other bits and pieces of countries and just kind of be at perpetual skirmishes, right? Anything to build that plausible scenario, it then just kind of helps with immersion, right? It kind of helps ground everything in reality, and it makes it a little bit more interesting, right? And not only that, sometimes it comes up with like novel gameplay interactions where like sometimes people come up with dumb ideas on their own while they're playing the mission, and they kind of like maybe pull an idea out of thin air based off the scenario you came up with, and you're like, oh, you know what? Let's roll with that. Let's see where that goes, right? Like maybe he's trying to return, your HVT that you came up with. You're like, he's from this country, this neighboring country, and you need to get him. And he's like, well, they have some forces that are up there with the checkpoint. Let's bring them to them. And it's like, oh, yeah, sure, why not? That works. And it's kind of emergent, right? You come up with stuff, and people take it and run with it. And the kind of final design for actually starting with an objective is, I like to call multi-verb objectives. We've all been in the missions where it's like, hey, we have to go attack this town. And that's the entirety of the mission. It's just attack this town, right? And there's no real variance in there. And that kind of mission isn't necessarily bad. It's just boring, right? There's no extra stuff going on. It's just kind of whatever. We've all played 100 of those missions. But if you started adding in like extra verbs, like, hey, we got to attack and hold that town, right? Now it's a little more interesting, right? Because now you not only do you have to attack it, you have to understand the layout and then defend it. That's two objectives for the price of one, right? And then you can keep going and going and going and going. Like, maybe the enemy has captured a bunch of armor, right? Like Syndicate has captured a bunch of APCs, but the host country wants those APCs back. So now, not only are you attacking, holding the objective, but now you also have to disable and return APCs, right? You can keep adding and adding for real low cost, right? And that could be like a side objective too. You don't even have to make that the main objective. It just adds like layers and layers and layers. The more layers you have, the more interesting the gameplay will be, to an extent, right? You don't want to be like 6 pages of ROEs and side objectives and this and that, right? There is a max limit, right? There's diminishing returns on these multi-verb objectives, but it's something to keep in mind when you're making the mission, right? If your mission feels kind of flat, throw in a twist here or there, right? See how it works out, right? Because even if the mission is kind of boring, right, or it doesn't quite work out how you want it to come like game day, that's fine. Right, it's still a mission. People are still there. People are still doing the objective. It still works, and you learn. Right, that's the most important part. Is keep learning, keep trying it. Even if you fall on your face, it's gonna be fine. People are still gonna play the mission. They're still gonna enjoy themselves. It's just not gonna work out how you want, and then you're gonna learn, and you're gonna fix it for the next week, and the next week, and the next week. The second kind of phase I would call is kitbash. That's kind of when you're putting everything together, right? So there's two kind of kitbash I describe. I don't know if any of you ever heard this word before. I think it comes from like model making or something. It's when you take a bunch of shit that doesn't really need to go together and put it together to make something new. There's two kind of kitbashings I would call. There's like faction kitbashing and then terraforming. So factions in Arma are pretty static, right? We've all fought every single faction 100 times. But like going back to that scenario with Syndicate, right? So if like let's say we want to fight Syndicate, like that you want the primary enemy is Syndicate. But you want them to have some armor, right? Because why not? So maybe you throw them down and you give them an APC, right? So put down an APC. Let's see what skins it has. It has some gorilla skins. Boom. Easy. Bam. Now Cindy has an APC, right? That's something novel. That's something we don't always see. It's new. Right? And again, you can attach side objectives. Maybe capture that APC. Or just disable it and mark its position for recovery later, right? You can do all sorts of crazy stuff like this. Like a nice trick that I used a couple of times. Let's say you want like bandit fire teams or whatever, like Syndicate dudes running around. Actually, we'll just do one group for now. And then you want them working with CSAT, right? But you want CSAT to kind of double cross them at the end of the mission or halfway through the mission, like decide they're pulling out and shoot Syndicate, whatever, something like that. You can group them all to an OPFOR unit, and now they've gone OPFOR. And bam, now you have an OPFOR Syndicate team, right? So they'll fight alongside each other just fine. Like even if the thing is set to hostile, They'll fight each other alongside just fine. And then about halfway through the mission, in Zeus, you just start spawning regular Syndicate dudes, and they'll fight the CSAT guys because they're independent now, right? So anything you can kind of do to like switch it up a little bit, like add in some sort of variance, because it is very static, right? We've all seen the same Bandit Fire team 1,000 times. We've all seen the same, couple of, FIA or ISAS or the Partisans, Spetsnaz, Fire teams, Recon, Sentries, all that. We've all seen these groups. I'm sure if I placed them down in a mission, you'd all recognize them almost instantly. But like, you can just small additions here and there will change it up a lot. Or for example, when you're putting them in like if you're putting them in a house or something like this. Oh, where's the house? Here it is. And they're kind of in here. Maybe you have like some AAF dudes in here. Maybe take their armor off, right? So they look like they were just caught in the open. They were like chilling in here, just doing whatever, eating or something, right? And they're hurt or something like that, right? Just small little variations, right? And you build these kind of stories and environments that aren't necessarily like the focal point, but they add a little bit of like color, right? And that's always something interesting to do. One other thing, like little green men, like you can add like, I keep going to Syndicate because it's the easiest, but like if you have Syndicate dudes and then you have maybe Spetsnaz guys that are kind of helping them out, and they're just like, they're there like advisors, and then a nice dynamic out of that would be maybe as you start to attack the advisors, maybe the advisors' host country comes back like, hey, stop attacking our dudes, so they start bringing in like helos or whatever to help them out, to get them out of there, and then you add like a little bit of peer-on-peer while still mainly fighting Syndicate. So then that's kind of most of the faction cohesion stuff. There's not a whole lot you can do with the factions, right? Because they are pretty static. But you can always do little bits here and there to kind of break up the silhouette or whatever. But then terraforming is where it gets really interesting. So obviously, I picked this mission on purpose because there's this massive fob that should not be here, right? So BI, about 2 years ago, I added this module, super interesting module. It's under environment modules. The hide terrain objects. So we have this massive jungle here, but this little module lets you hide basically anything. You can carve out huge areas, and let's say I want to get rid of all the trees over here, but I don't want to it also lets you get rid of buildings and such, right? But let's say I want to keep the buildings, right? I just want to get rid of trees. I can open it up and remove all that, and bam, now it's just trees are gone. All right? And so that's what I did over here with this, right? So by default, this little area here is actually covered in trees and such, right? So then I put this down, right? And so this is the little area it gave me, right? And so I just put down these I think they were added with Apex, these little trenches, right? And built up these walls and Hescos and little barricades and what have you. Right, and I basically created this novel, new, interesting area out of nothing. Just there was nothing here, and now there's something. All right, and it's a whole new. Even if the area isn't super awesome, like it's clearly not polished, right? It's very kind of glitchy looking, and it's not super well put together. But it's enough, right? It's just enough to create a new area that's feasible to fight in, and that'll go a long way. I found that with all things considered equal, fighting in a new interesting area, or like even a semi-interesting area, like kind of smallish like this, is far more interesting than fighting in the same 3 towns over and over again. I find that most missions that have something like a new area like this are remembered a lot more than areas that it's like, all right, we're gonna go fight in Cavallo again. Even if it's a cool mission and there's lots of like stuff going on, generally when you fight in a new area, it's gonna leave a lasting impression, because it's the same reason that like when you visit a new location in real life or whatever, like you go on vacation or you're visiting like a monument, the day kind of goes on a little bit longer because you're taking everything new, like second by second, as opposed to you already know it, you're just going through the motions. And so you don't have to. Obviously, this took quite a while to make. This took like 2 or 3 weeks of on and off wait. Like I'll spend like an hour on it, working on it, tweaking this here and there, and then I'll do something else or whatever. You don't have to go to that extent, right? Even just modifying a town a little bit, like maybe move this building, put a different building there, stick in a skyscraper in the middle of this building. I think that's what Chad did a little bit too for the last battle. He put in a skyscraper here, a skyscraper there. It really broke up the silhouette. It made it feel kind of new, kind of fresh, and that goes a long way in terms of enjoyability, right? And then and then especially on top of that, right? So I created this area, and we all know how famous Arma is for having no furniture, right? Well, if you make the area, you can populate it pretty well as you go, right? So I was like, well, where would the officers work, right? Maybe they work in here, right? Bam, little office area, little dudes here. Where do they sleep? Oh, they sleep up here, right? Where do they eat? Right there, right? Put down some camo nets, some chairs, tables. That'll go a long way, right? Rec area, mortar pit. I have all these little areas, right? Just you don't have to super detail everything, but just putting down details here and there is going to go a long way in making the space believable. And kind of, for lack of a better term, making it feel kind of alive, like people actually live and work here, right? And then, obviously, enemies, right? So, just kind of touching on the if I can get them to show up, there we go. Like, enemy placement. So, I didn't really know where to fit this in the discussion, but just a little tip and trick I've learned. So, enemies you place in the editor will, by default, when you play the mission, be assigned to the server. So that's going to reduce your load as if you're curating, right? That's going to improve your frame rate, but it's going to bring the server frame rate down if there's a ton of dudes. And so I like to put down kind of the static defensive guys, and then maybe one or two roaming patrols, and that's about it, right? That lets me manage the server load and the AI load a little bit better. And that's kind of something that you just got to feel out and figure out what works for you. But I will say that a nice little trick, right? I'll probably put this little piece of code in the channel, but so this little piece of code right here will stop him. He will not move from the spot, right? And so I know some of our AI mods kind of make them just like wander off whenever they take contact. So this dude will be grounded here, and then if I select crouch, he will not leave the crouch position. He will stay crouched there forever, right? And so that kind of lets you set up these interesting dynamic scenarios where like, or not dynamic, but like these interesting scenarios that you've thought of and you've pre-planned kind of where forces will be coming from, and let you set up as if they were in actual guard positions, as opposed to them just wandering off in random locations or like hiding behind a door like they like to do. And it kind of just it forces like a level of fire that you can't dynamically create with the AI, right? And so there's a little bit of a lot of what I do is half like quote unquote scripted events and half quote unquote like dynamic, right? So it's real easy to throw on a couple of dudes and create a very convincing defense, right? I guess is the thesis to that. But that's just kind of something to be aware of. You do you, right? If you want to put all your dudes down, the server can handle that just fine. If you want to curate all your dudes, the server, you can do that just fine. Just be aware of the frame rate issues that come with that. And again, it comes to a lot of like just experience with it. You gotta kind of just do it to learn it. But that's most of that for kitbashing and AI placement. But that comes down to, so that's going to be the bulk of your mission, was everything I just covered, those two last slides. This slide is kind of like, I call it sugar, right? It's stuff that you can add, but absolutely do not need to. It's just stuff to make it like look better. And the number one of this is triggers, right? Triggers are awesome because it lets you automate tasks, right? I'll show you like not just like tasks, like things that pop up, but like anything. Reinforcement waves, ammo, airdrops, literally anything. Anything you can think of, you can automate with a trigger. You just kind of gotta have the know-how, right? And you can also pull that know-how from the pool. Like, I'm sure Macus could help you a ton with triggers. I can help you with triggers. Sam can help you with triggers, right? We all have kind of experience with this, right? And we all kind of have our own like uses we've used them for, and can like have our little expert areas. We're good at it. So don't be afraid to draw from that pool, right? For the sugar stuff. But again, I want to emphasize, you don't have to add this. If this stuff seems like weird or scary to you, don't use it, right? You use it whenever you feel comfortable with it. And just to kind of show you what I'm talking about, if none of you have used triggers before, let me make them visible. For example, this trigger right here, right? It's this big box that goes, I made it way wider than I need to, but I just didn't want you guys to go around it. It's just checking if Blue 4 is present inside of it. I synced it to this little create task module, and all this does is make that little pop-up to secure the command post that pops up as you were driving the boat to the island, right? And then once you get to the actual fob, here it is. This one is covering the entire fob, right? It's this big blue circle, and all it's doing is checking that there are no independent forces left in the circle. So once you've killed all of the green 4 dudes, it activates this task, set task state, to succeeded, which is linked to the first task, right? So that's all it is you're chaining together triggers and however have you, right? And you can get as weird and complex with this as if you want too. So, for example, there's a little piece of intel in here that you had there's like a hold action, right? And it'll set it only activates once this is this, whatever. It's not super important. But to end it, right, so there's a phase where you have to wait for the intel to download. I literally just have this trigger checking if this dude is alive. And if this dude is alive, then it just waits. But if this dude's gone or dead, it'll activate. It'll like end the intel download and be like, all right, you guys are good, you can leave. Right? So I like semi-automated the task, right? So I let you guys move in, and it's all automated to do the task up to the clearing the fob. And then once you hold the fob, I decide when you guys can leave, right? So I as Zeus, I'm like, all right, you guys have the mission's gone on long enough, or we can leave kind of early, whatever have you, and then I can kill that dude and be like, all right, you guys are good to leave, exfil, and then it does it for me, right? I don't have to call in his NATO and be like, you guys are good, right? Because that would make no sense if NATO was like monitoring the download. But again, you don't need to do that, right? It's whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I was about to ask, can you set it to a timer?
Yes. So there are little timers down here, right? So there's like 2 sets, right? So there's one where it's like the countdown, right? So once this is set, like let's say 60 seconds, and this min-max mid is like if you want to randomize it. So it'll say like after this is, if I don't know whatever blue 4 or any player present, 60 seconds after a player is present, it'll activate. Or you can be like, it must be true for 60 seconds, right? And even if, the answer is yes. If you, when it comes to scripting and triggers, you can script any functionality you want. Or if you can pull from the pool of, like, I could help you script something, or you can find a script online. I know Macus for a while was curating, in the S3 drive, a collection of scripts that people could use. Endless. Possibilities are endless, right? It's just willing to put in the time and effort to like implement it and learn it, right? And so that's most of that. And then another thing that's kind of in the sugar category as well is respawns, right? So our default is to kind of, the quick and dirty is you just, there's like a 5-second delay. You respawn and then Zeus kind of teleports you back into the fight. Don't be afraid to like play around with that a little bit. Like, let's say if you have a slingshot element, right? Maybe Zeus doesn't teleport you. Maybe slingshot has to go get you, right? And then that adds that complexity of like logistically, how do we get this dude back in? Where's a good LZ? Stuff like that. Or if you don't have a slingshot element, you still want people to kind of be out of the fight for a little bit, you can do ace spectator, right? So, for example, my last 2 missions, I've had ace spectator so that when you die, you're dead for like 5 minutes, but you have ace spectator so you can like look what's going on and not be bored out of your mind. So if you want to do something like that, you just multiplayer and then just check this box and you're done. Like it's done for you. You set your respawn time down here. But then I also didn't want people to like cheat in Ace Spectator, so I was like, what can I do for that? So I go to Ace Options, and I'm like, I bet Spectator has some options, and it does. So I was like, first and third person only, overwrite clients, vision mode none, as opposed to thermal and night vision, sure. Max follow distance 5 meters, sure. Right. And I didn't necessarily know those settings were in there. I just play around with it. I was like, hey, I wonder what settings are, right? I don't want people to fly around and like tell people where the enemy are. So I just look around, right? And don't be afraid to do that, right? If you see some interesting settings, play with it. See. I don't know, it'd be cool. Who knows? It's a lot about, it's really up to the mission maker to decide, how things are going to run or not, right? Obviously, there are some that are set in the mission maker document and the checklist and all that, but really it's up to you guys to do it how you want to do it and play around with it. And if you find something that's really dope and we all love it, like a ton, there's a good chance it might make it like become standard, right? I mean, that's happened in the past before. So don't be afraid to experiment, right? And if you're not comfortable, then don't experiment. It's, again, this sugar stuff, I just want to make sure I'm emphasizing, don't let it scare you, right? If this is all fucking gobbledygook to you, then don't do it. Just do like the basic stuff. That's fine. Nobody's going to say anything to you, right? It's not required. Then obviously I added scripting on here because scripting is completely optional. That's its own whole other, I've spent years learning scripting, right? It's not, I can't explain it to you on a PowerPoint, but it's something to look at, right? You can play around with it and learn. And I'm probably going to put out some sort of like little starter course for learning this script at some point. It's been on my to-do list for a while. But again, totally unnecessary. You can only do it. You can do it if you want to, but you don't have to. And so the final little slide I have here is for the SMAC because nobody ever really talks about it, and I think it'd be good to go over it real quick just to give base level knowledge on it. So obviously it stands for Situation, Mission, Execution, Admin, Logistics, Command and Control. We're all familiar with the acronym. We're all kind of familiar with how it plays out. I just kind of want to nail specifically what each section is trying to accomplish, because we all kind of know what goes in each section, but we don't really. It's not codified anywhere what each section is specifically trying to accomplish. So I have the SMAC from the 2 weeks ago. It's the one we were just on. So situation is this is all context, right? None of this is really important to the gameplay, right? It's just context, right? You're trying to create a realistic scenario. And that's 90% of creating a realistic scenario is this situation paragraph right here. After you nail that, you can pretty much do anything you want, right? In terms of your objectives and how you want to do that. As long as you can get this paragraph to match it, you're good. And then obviously everything after here, you're setting up something for TACOM. You want all the forces to you want everyone in the JSO force to understand who they're fighting, what kind of actions they're going to do, right? You don't want them to assume that the enemy's going to bunker down and use withering fire when really you as a mission maker are planning them to bonsai charge JSO, right? You kind of want to provide that high level understanding of what's going to happen so that they're planning around something that makes sense, right? You don't want them to make a garbage plan because they had a garbage SMAC. And then obviously you want them to know who they're fighting. You want them to kind of have an understanding of what kind of assets they'll be going up against, stuff like that. This mission section is literally just for the people who zone out through the entire SMAC. It's just, hey, this is what we're doing. That's one sentence, and that's why we say it twice, so that everybody is understanding what we're doing. If you don't read anything but this single sentence here, you should still be able to follow along in the mission at the very least. Execution is mostly for TACOM, right? This is to kind of set their left and right limits on what they need to do and what they need to focus on, as well as when they're good to kind of start slowing down and getting ready to debrief and all that, right? Because I'm sure we've all been in that mission where it's we're told, hey, go take that hill, and then we take the hill and we're like, are we done? Is there a Q or F or what, right? That's what the end state is for. It's for TACOM to kind of go, all right, we've satisfied the end state, we're good to start getting ready to debrief. All right, and it kind of lets them steer the mission as they go. Admin and logistics, pretty obvious, right? You need to know what you have and what you need, and then also I like to use it to any non-standard stuff weird scenarios, weird restrictions, obviously what's said here, it's just something nice to know. And then command and control, obviously the frequency stuff is important for deconflicting radios. It kind of takes that out of TACOM's hands, so you don't have to waste that time briefing it when we already know what it is. And then the one I use personally the most, call signs. So I like to provide one level higher than JSO forces for two reasons. One, it allows TACOM an easy out to figure out what the fuck's going on if they're confused, right? So instead of having to go, hey God, where the fuck are we going now? They can go, hey NATO, where are we going right now, right? And it's a little more immersive, right? As opposed to them having to Steam message you or whatever. And then also it provides you as the curator an easy in if TACOM or JSO is doing something dumb, right? If they're sitting in a town for 20 minutes, you're just get the fuck out of the town, please, and go to the next objective. You can call them as NATO and be like, hey, we've got signal intelligence that you've got a massive force moving your way. You guys need to leave ASAP. And then, boom, they have an immersive, lore-friendly reason to tell them to get the fuck out, right? So, that's kind of what I use the call signs for. And that's all of the SMAC, right? It's not super hard. It's probably... I personally find it the least fun part of making a mission because I hate this whole fucking situation part, but it's important that we do it, right? And it's important that we do it well.
So I'll make the point that shorter and sweeter is better in this. I often run into the issue myself where I'll try and write too much into the situation and overcomplicate it. If you can write something short and sweet and keep it down to the bare necessity, then that'll look better. The way Romano's written this up, it's just 5 lines of information, and yet it tells you the whole story of what's going on, rather than I've done SMACs where I've written three times this amount and it doesn't give you any more real information. So short and sweet.
Yeah, and that's also something I would say is there are times where it's nice to have that lore, right? To kind of have the understanding. For example, campaigns, right? Like My Warner was huge. I had a whole backstory on why we're in the area and all, because it's nice to know, right? If it's this big, long, story-driven, like string of operations, it's nice to like kind of have that pre-set up story. But for a week to week, you don't really need it, right? It's people show up for 2 hours on Saturday to knock out some fun armor. They're not really caring about the story too much. As much as it sucks sometimes, because sometimes I have some real dope ideas, but I'm like, nobody's gonna fucking read this, so I'm just gonna kind of like condense it down to the most important part and hope that people will catch on, right? And they don't always, but you know what? That's fine.
Yeah, quick question. So, can you quickly go over if people want to add in things like images for like the loading screen or the for the slideshow features, or when they add in scripts, where do those need to be, and how do they ensure that those go into the PBO on compression or uploader?
Sure. Okay, so just because it has everything you mentioned, I'm gonna actually demonstrate this with Gunslinger. So obviously, so when you make a mission, right, the only things that are going to be there by default is mission.sqm, right? So the way to locate this, it's going to be in your documents folder, your other profiles, whatever your profile is. Depending on where you save it, it's either going to be in missions or MP missions. And then it's probably going to show up in here, but I have folders in here, so if we go to wherever it is, it's going to look like one of these, right? It's going to be whatever the mission name is, dot, and then the terrain, so Gunslinger's on VR, so it's .vr, right? And so mission.sqm, this is, if I open it, you'll see, this is binarized. Don't worry about this. This is, if it's not binarized, it's going to be like a big, like almost XML structure of all the shit in the mission. That's your actual mission file, right? So you don't want to really play with that too much. There are specific scenarios where you will need to play with that. But for the most part, don't ever touch that. Now, for like pictures and stuff, so specifically like loading screens, you can set it in the attributes up here. I think it's multiplayer. No, it's not. It's in general. Yeah, picture, right? So it's a path, right? So I have it set in description.ext. Actually, I have it set in the other one here. But it's going to be the same kind of deal, right? So it's set here, but it can be set in the editor. So I could literally copy and paste this in the editor right here. And it just works like any other file path, right? So it's set to data/loadingimage.paa, data loading image, and bam, that's what's going to show up in that little square with the text around it. Now, a PAA is some weird Arma specific image. If you load up, you have to download Arma 3 tools through Steam, which is free. It comes with Arma 3. And then with that, you're going to use TextView 2, right? And all it is, it's you just open a PNG, right? Any PNG will work. I don't know if I have one. Yeah, so we'll just open this PNG. Just be aware with PAAs, it has to be a power of 2. So you see how it's 248 by 1024? They're both power of 2s. That's the only thing you have to be aware of. I think there are some instances where it doesn't matter, but you're much safer if you just always make it match that. Then you'll go to save as, right? And you just save it as a PAA. And that's it. That's literally all you have to do for PAs. As for making sure it shows up in the PBO, as long as it's in this mission folder, when you export it, it'll be in the PBO.
So I think it's worth just for those who might be unsure pointing out that when you create a mission, it creates this folder that Romano's in right now. So that's the mission folder. Then everything you put into that folder, including scripts, images, and anything else, is the mission. And then when you export the mission as a PBO, it compiles all of that and compresses it into a single thing. So that's what is creating in the mission what's in that folder. So if you don't have something in that folder, if you want something in your mission that's not in that folder, it's not going to go into the mission. It needs to be in that folder.
Yeah, and 2 quick notes on something. I've had PNGs work. I don't know if that's like a new feature or whatever, but I've had just plain PNGs work.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do.
Yeah. Okay. And then another thing was when he was pointing out the in the editor the path to an image or a script or whatever, right? When you're using those paths, you can't put like C:/ and a path or something, right? Because the other people playing the mission are going to have that file in the same location. So you want to just give it a / whatever it is, or just a plain old file name if it's in the root folder for the mission, because it's going to compress into that PBO.
Yeah, it's pointing to itself, so you don't need any more information besides the root folder.
Yeah, and so when anytime you do any sort of like file path, it's gonna start in your root folder here where the mission.sqm is always. So if I do data/laptop_n.paa, it's gonna point to this for everybody, right? You don't want to do global paths because they don't. I'm not gonna say they don't work. They work sometimes. They might work for you depending on how you do it, but it's best practice not to, because obviously if you share that mission with somebody else, they're not gonna have it in the same path, and it's gonna end up messing with stuff. And another thing that I've run into for images, at the very least, Arma likes to cache these images. So once you load, let me just throw it on a laptop real quick and show you what I'm talking about. So this is a nice thing to cover as well. So in the S3 drive, I have some of these objects, right? If you scroll down, you'll see a custom texture here you can do. So a lot of these objects, there are some objects at least, that you can replace that very easily. And for example, it's the screen on the laptop, right? So I have gone through and found as many of those objects as I can and created templates for you in the S3 drive. I can give that out to whoever needs it. Just hit me up. So like I've marked out the area that it'll draw, because they're not very intuitive. There are some, like the laptop has like this area is drawn, but there's also like, because it has to be a power of 2, right? And this isn't a power of 2 screen. There's like a whole area over here that isn't drawn. It's just there because it has to be there. So I've gone out and marked the areas that will draw to the screen, and I've given you some templates and like to make it a little bit easier to design. So for example, for this, if I wanted to set one of those images I have, I remember the name of it, laptop end. Right, and so bam, it's that easy. And now I have a nice little, and you can put whatever you want on there, right? You can make your own little like I call it immersive intel, where it's like maybe you have like an email open that tells you grid coordinates to the next base or whatever, right? So you can do again, possibilities are endless. It's up to how creative you are. But the quirk I was talking about is, now that I've loaded this image, right? It's been in game. If I replace that image, so if I go, oh shit, I misspelled download or whatever, and I have to replace it, it won't change until I close down Arma and reload it again. It'll still show the incorrect image because it's cached. So just be aware of that. If you're pulling, because I've had several instances where I've been pulling my fucking hair out, like, why won't this update? And it's because it caches the image. So that's that.
I'm not a teacher, but I just say, don't try use PNGs. For my first mission you guys played, I spent about 2 weeks trying to figure out why JPEGs weren't working until Chad told me it needed to be a PAA.
Yeah, so when it comes to images in Arma, everything's going to be There are some instances where JPEGs will work, and there are some instances where PNGs will work, but I found it's far easier to just convert everything to PAA and not worry about it. Alright, well, thank you all. I hope I have taught you all something, and I hope to see many of you on the Mission Creator schedule in the future.